All right. Welcome, everybody, to the Orange Wheel podcast. I'm Ted Paulus, CEO and founder of Orange Wheel, and I'm excited to talk today with Brandon Karpeles. He is the CEO of Sovreign IO, and Brandon and I have had the opportunity to talk a couple times before today and nearly crossed paths at BTC Prague last month. And given that we're both sort of in the same field of advisory services for corporations in the area of Bitcoin adoption, I thought we'd have a really interesting conversation today and be able to share it with our respective audiences. So with that, Brandon, thanks very much for being here.
Yeah, thanks for having me. It's always exciting to talk to other people doing the same thing as we talked about before when we chatted and set this up, that I hope one day there's hundreds of these companies, thousands of these companies, because the total addressable market of businesses is, I guess I don't know how many businesses there are in the world, but I would venture it's somewhere in the 10 to 100 million range, and that we're going to need bodies to do this orange pilling. And I always joke that my goal is to work ourselves out of a job. But for the next 5 to 10 years, there's going to be a huge need for companies to not only get onboarded to Bitcoin, but get onboarded in a way for people that have been through the weeds and have made mistakes. I don't know about you, but I made plenty of mistakes. And boy, I wish I had someone along the way to hold my hand and steer me clear of those mistakes. And just, not even just from a potentially money losing for your business, but just the time and energy that really needs to be spent to get up to speed on this, to learn how to hold your own keys or open a lightning channel, just to do all this stuff, to have someone with expertise to come in. I look back at it now, knowing what I know now, I probably would have never done it then, but I would have loved to just write like a $5,000 check and just be like, come take care of all this stuff for me, set me up on a DCA, here's how much of my paycheck I want going to it, run my node, open a lightning channel for me. Like that would be so worth every penny looking back on it. So the value proposition is huge, and we want these businesses not to lose their way and mess around with Dogecoin and learn hard lessons. And the professional value of companies like ours, I think, is so important to help these people stay on the right path and get on the right way.
Yeah, I couldn't agree with you more. I think the market potential to begin with there is just enormous, almost unlimited. And of course, I suppose we are setting ourselves up kind of in front of that wave before it fully emerges. But I think I get the sense that the wave is getting bigger and nearer with every passing day. So I think it's going to be a very exciting space for companies like Sovreign and Orange Wheel to play in over the coming years. Some reflections on your first points there. I mean, I think one of the differences between our own individual experiences and what I would business leaders might face is that depending on the nature of their business, they might be more in the role of being fiduciaries of other people's wealth, the shareholders, rather than their own, unless it's kind of a mom and pop shop. And I think that's a different type of risk profile where they're it's especially difficult, as you say, to kind of be able to take that risk upon yourself versus having kind of a trusted third party to be able to, again, kind of hold the hand. Because I guess for individuals, in some ways, it's nice to kind of go through the motions yourself to learn go through the experiences and get the learnings out of maybe failing a little bit here and there and losing a few Satoshis through the process. But certainly for businesses, they're maybe not at liberty to go through such risks for such learnings.
Well, you also have things like nonprofits or NGOs who a lot of times they rely on donations to their organization. And if you take a big donation and screw it up and fritter it away, you're never getting that donation again. So unfortunately, you don't really have the ability or the luxury of making those mistakes and learning on your own. Learning on your own, to your point, is going to not just affect you personally. There are second and third order effects that will happen when you're in charge of in an organization and other people's money, as you said.
Great. And I think that's a nice segue into kind of my next question, which has to do with the types of clients that you support. If you could maybe give a flavor for, what is the different spectrum of companies that you're currently servicing, and how do their interests maybe vary from one side to the other?
So the short answer is we will support any type of business, any company that wants to come to us and get help getting onboarded to Bitcoin, learning about Bitcoin, we will happily do it. That being said, I would say our focus is more in the small to medium sized business range, the world I came from, middle market, if you will, that type of business where the owner has a lot more control, or owner, a small group of owners have a lot more control of the business, along with uh, places where they're holding a lot of cash. That, again, back to the nonprofits, churches, HOAs, these sorts of things where they're just sitting on these melting ice cubes. Really want to help them understand that there's a way to protect your purchasing power into the future without also putting yourself in a position where you're not going to be able to pay your electric bills tomorrow if Bitcoin all of a sudden draws down 80% or something like that. And having those conversations. So it really does run the gamut. But generally speaking, I would think, not public companies, more privately held with close owner. The owner is close to the day-to-day operations, is what I'm trying to say.
Got it. Yeah, so I think those types of companies can enable relatively quick decision making as well, and not need to have this broad consensus across a fairly diverse board to be able to kind of move relatively quickly into this type of strategy.
Yes, exactly. There's a couple or one central point that needs to be educated and onboarded, and that is certainly much easier than gathering consensus amongst a large group, and that is more our focus.
So something I've been kind of thinking quite a bit about recently is, this, of course, in social media and also the broad media now, when people think about Bitcoin adoption by corporates, of course, it's these really massive companies like MicroStrategy and MetaPlanet. They're not all massive, but they're ones that are kind of going really into providing a different type of strategy in which they really are vehicles for the capital markets to migrate wealth from that is trapped and giving it Bitcoin exposure. And then there's a whole debate around MNAV valuations and all this sort of stuff. So I'm just kind of curious, given that a lot of the corporations that you're dealing with are private and smaller, does this discussion about the valuations of these public companies kind of come into the discussion and decision making process? Does it influence the Bitcoin strategies that these smaller companies are looking at?
Yeah, absolutely. I will say we've even had multiple people reach out and ask us to help them with a Bitcoin, the strategy playbook or the MetaPlanet playbook, whatever you want to call it. And while we can advise on that, while we have some expertise on that, that's really not what we're trying to mend. We're not here to show you how to do fiat arbitrage. I get it. It's going to happen. Pierre Rochard wrote about it 11 years ago. It's obviously coming. Why wouldn't you arbitrage the worst currency for the better currency once you figure it out? Of course, you're going to do that. And so I don't have anything against people playing that game. It was always going to happen. And as long as the people still take dollars, it's going to happen. So ultimately, if you want to blame someone for what's going on with the corporate treasuries, look yourself in the mirror and ask yourself if you're using any dollars. And even selling your Bitcoin for dollars to pay your electric bill, you're still using dollars. I hate to tell that to you. You are still interacting in a system and are reliant on a third-party provider accepting your dollars. So, everyone's a hypocrite. This was going to happen. Deal with it. That being said, our advice is we're trying to get back to good old-fashioned profitable businesses. You make more than you spend, and you need to save that time and energy. You need to save those margins in a money that's not going to get debased, because you effectively, by holding dollars, take your profit margin and then reduce that by 8% every year. And that's just not sustainable for businesses. And we're trying to help them see that. We're trying to help get that. It's safe for the very select few, the highest of the food chain, the biggest of the public companies. They don't care. They can borrow at 1% or whatever. Every company turns into a bank. The safety quote, like that all happens. But we're really focusing on trying to steer these companies to just good old-fashioned, be profitable, store it in 5 years, in 10 years, in 15 years. When your kids take over the business, you'll be very, very happy. And that's the message we're trying to steer people away from the corporate treasury status, or just say, maybe we're not the best fit for you. Maybe let's refer you to someone else we have some connections with. That's not our expertise. That's not what we're hoping to do.
I get it. And I like that in the sense that it's a very simple message and one that should resonate people. It doesn't have to be super complex in the way that it's as you put it, right? I mean, save your retained earnings in something that appreciates in value and not something that's shrinking in value. And the 8% is probably if they just held notes, but if they held money market funds, maybe it's a delta of 6%, or if they're holding
Yes.
something a little bit more risky,
Yeah.
but ultimately it is going to be beneficial.
Well, it could be in 4% notes and still 8% getting to base. It just depends on whatever the button pushers have in store for us that year.
And I think we know that the current monetary system is unsustainable, and no matter what interest rate they're paying on it, it's going to be less than the debasement of the value of the purchasing power
Yeah,
of
I
the
mean, we
US
have
dollar.
examples of this monetary system failing in the Bible. Like, this is nothing new. There were debt jubilees because it became unsustainable. Like, this is as old as recorded time, literally. So,
Yeah. And I think that's the very cool thing about Bitcoin is that it's something that can finally maybe break that cycle, right? The cycle that we've had since the dawn of humanity, effectively, right? So,
agreed. It's crazy when you actually think about it and dwell on it a little bit. It is actually mind blowing. Like, it is crazier than any amount of mushrooms or weed, mushrooms you could eat or weed you could smoke. The fact that Bitcoin may break 10,000 years of monetary debauchery is just, it's so mind blowing. It's incredible.
and I think that's why people like you and I go down the rabbit hole and never get out of it, right? Because it is just such a
Yeah,
fascinating and as I said, blowing thing that is actually happening in reality. So I think it's very, very interesting.
truly.
So, kind of just coming back, one last comment here on the kind of different flavors of corporate adoption of Bitcoin strategy. I know it's, in my mind at least, it's a bit of a spectrum, and I think there's a lot of things you can do when it comes to Bitcoin corporate adoption of Bitcoin. Of course, the treasury role I think is central and foundational for any company. Initially, I think at the onset of really just the retained earnings play, and then that can be complemented in some instances with this kind of like financial engineering view. Not for everyone, for a select few that it could make sense, but you mentioned also payments, for example. I mean, do you also advise your clients on other aspects of adoption, whether it be payments or Bitcoin mining if they're in the energy sector? How do you think about these other kind of aspects of Bitcoin corporate adoption?
Absolutely. So let me just start with mining and get that out of the way real quick. We have some expertise in mining. It's a very rare circumstance where we think it would be a good idea to, hey, let's talk about mining for, use of your stranded energy or use of your cheap electricity or whatever. We can advise on that. We will advise on that. We have some partners as well. I have a very good friend who is very deep in the mining industry that I've referred people to in the past just for additional consultation and that sort of thing. So we will advise on that. We will help on that. I would say 99 times out of 100, it's probably not going to make sense. So that being said, as far as the payments go, yes, absolutely. That is a huge part of what we try to impart into the companies we're talking to, is to not only put Bitcoin on your balance sheet, preserve your wealth into the future. That is kind of step one. Now it's okay, how do you accept Bitcoin? And just being honest, that most of these businesses that are going to go into the space where they're not they didn't start as a Bitcoin business. Hey, I'm selling my product for Bitcoin, or I'm in the Bitcoin space. I've been running a paper company for 30 years, and now I'm going to start accepting Bitcoin. The reality is your payments and accepting of invoices in Bitcoin are probably going to be few and far between to start. So we talk through that with the customer. We say, how many payments do you think you're going to get? And then we try to put them into a program where they're not having to pay monthly fees over and over, where they're paying more monthly fees than they're getting in Bitcoin. We will set them up self-sovereignly. We will put them on a BTC Pay server. We'll get their own Lightning channel open. We'll do whatever they want. We're also partners with Zapright, and we work with Flash as well. So we'll get them set up, and there's some other things we're exploring now. We're running into some issues in New York just because the laws are so crazy there, and the bit license and everything like that. So we're exploring a couple other programs and options for sort of edge cases like that as well. But yeah, we will absolutely come in, encourage you to accept payments in Bitcoin, and then set you up in the way, after talking with you and consulting with you, that makes the most sense for your company. Do you have people that can run a system? Do you just need to set it and forget it? And do you just need the infrastructure to be able to send out an invoice and go through all those sorts of different machinations and then make sure it works for them and get them rolling.
I like that kind of holistic perspective. Is again, I guess, in the headlines, it's all about treasury. It's all about savings. And of course that makes sense and is central and is in some ways a little bit more obvious. But I think coming in with that holistic perspective is going to be increasingly beneficial for the clients.
Yeah. It's one of those things where it's like, okay, you've done step one. Now let's get you to step two. And we're here to handhold you as much or as little as you want and get you in. And I always hated it. In my old job, every deal was different. I would get asked questions like, okay, what do you do in this situation? And the answer is, sadly, always, it depends. It really is so dependent on so many myriad factors. It's almost like Austrian economics, right? Like human action has infinite amounts of possibilities and people making decisions and cost benefit. And then you go to Econ 202 and they're trying to cram it into like a 4 variable equation that you can just figure out what supply and demand are going to be. And I feel like that's, a lot of times with these businesses as well, there is no one size fits all. There is no, well, it's this industry and they make this much money and that this is their profit margin. Therefore, it's really, what's your life experience as an owner? How did you get here? Do you have other people on your team that are competent in handling this? Do you have no one that's competent in handling this? Do you need us to train someone? So it's like every situation is so unique, so different. Do you just have a ton of reserves you can throw at this problem? Are you on a really tight budget? So it all is just totally individual company dependent. And I hate giving that answer, but it is true.
So that might also answer my next question, in which case, I guess it could be a bit shorter, but specifically when it comes to how much of their retained earnings on their balance sheet to allocate towards Bitcoin, are there some heuristics or some factors that kind of come into influencing that decision that are particularly important in most cases? Or again, is it kind of too complex case by case?
Yeah, the factor is how orange-pilled is the owner. So in all seriousness, it's how well do you understand this asset? Do you get it? Are you like, okay, I'm 100% in. I read the Bitcoin Standard. I've listened to 100 podcasts. I just don't know how to do this. Like, are you at that point? Or are you like, I hear this being talked about on CNBC and my advisor said, like, maybe you could get some, but I can't advise you on it. Are you kind of in that phase? And, then let's figure out what you're comfortable holding. A general rule of thumb, I would say, just sort of what amount of Bitcoin what percentage of Bitcoin on your balance sheet would make you uncomfortable sleeping at night? And then let's back off from that. Like, where are you uncomfortable? What do you need? 24 months of runway sitting in cash? Do you want 6 months of runway sitting in cash? What will allow you to go to bed at night? Are you a seasonal business? Do you need maybe some more cash in the winter because you're not going to be mowing lawns until the summer? Or maybe there's a light snowfall year if you're doing that. And just sitting down with them. And again, back to what we were talking about, it's just catering it to that specific owner. But the general thought is, how well do you understand Bitcoin? How fundamentally are you committed to this being a long-term asset that you're willing to hold? And what do you feel comfortable with having your immediate needs to keep the lights on and the doors open in the short?
That's great. No, I think that's the right approach. And again, it's not a one-size-fits-all solution, but it is important, I think, that the conviction be a key factor, because the last thing you might want is your clients kind of going through a situation where they're now panic selling their Bitcoin at a loss and then shaking their fist at Brandon and team for putting them in that position.
You didn't tell me this was going to happen. This was supposed to be going up forever. I heard the Michael Saylor quote. Now I don't know what's going on.
Exactly. But this has been super enlightening, Brandon. Thanks so much for your time today. We're going to end this segment and we're going to kind of continue the conversation in the next segment together.